Toby slapped her. Around them, whispers spread through the crowd. Did he really slap her? That's someone's grandmother. Someone record that. But the old woman said nothing. At Bright Future Academy, pride often arrived before the morning bell. The school sat along a busy road where the noise of the city never truly slept. Cars honked impatiently, Okada riders zigzagged between traffic, and the smell of roasted corn and fried akara floated through the air from roadside vendors who lined the street outside the school gate. Students poured through the tall iron gates every morning like a river of uniforms, white shirts, navy trousers, polished shoes, and backpacks filled with books and ambition. Some students came in crowded buses, some came in small family cars, and a few arrived in vehicles so expensive that even the teachers occasionally stared. Among those few was Toby Adebayo. Toby did not simply attend Bright Future Academy. He dominated it. He was tall for his age, confident in the careless way that comes from growing up without ever hearing the word no. His father owned a chain of construction companies that had built half the luxury estates in the city. His mother appeared regularly in glossy magazines beside headlines about charity dinners and society galas. At home, the Adebayo mansion stood behind tall gates and security cameras. Servants moved quietly through marble halls. Everything was polished, controlled, and comfortable. From a young age, Toby had absorbed an unspoken lesson. Money meant importance. Importance meant power. And power meant people should move out of your way. Teachers tolerated him because his parents funded school projects. Students admired him because he always had the newest phone, the newest sneakers, and the loudest stories about weekend parties. But admiration is not the same as respect. Still, Toby never noticed the difference. That afternoon, the final bell rang and students flooded out of their classrooms like birds escaping a cage. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Lockers slammed. Shoes tapped loudly across the tiled floors. Toby walked down the corridor with three of his closest friends, Kunle, Femi, and Jeed, each trying to outdo the others with jokes and exaggerated stories. Did you see the teacher's face when Toby answered that question? Kunle laughed. He looked like he wanted to faint. Femi nudged Toby playfully. You didn't even read the chapter. Toby shrugged with a grin. Confidence, my friend. Confidence solves everything. They burst out laughing. Outside, the afternoon sun was fierce. The heat pressed down on the city like a heavy blanket, and the red dust along the roadside shimmered in the light. The school gate was crowded with students waiting for rides, buying snacks, or gossiping about the day. And just beside the gate, sitting quietly on a low wooden stool, was an old woman. She had been there for years. Some students remembered seeing her when they were in their first year. Others barely noticed her at all. She sold roasted groundnuts in small paper cones folded from old newspapers. Her tray rested on a short wooden stand, and the warm smell of peanuts drifted gently through the air. Her wrapper was faded from many washings. The colors, once bright green and yellow, had softened into pale shades that told stories of time and endurance. Her hands were thin but steady, her back slightly bent. Her eyes, however, were clear and watchful. She greeted students with quiet kindness. Groundnut, my children. Some bought from her, some ignored her, some greeted her respectfully, and some, like Toby, never really saw her at all. That day, the heat was particularly strong. The sunlight shifted slowly across the pavement, creeping closer to the spot where her tray rested. She wiped her forehead with the edge of her wrapper and gently adjusted the tray, trying to keep the peanuts from overheating. But the tray was heavy, and her arms trembled slightly. As Toby and his friends approached the gate, laughing loudly, the old woman looked up. She noticed Toby immediately, not because he was rich, not because he was loud, but because there was something restless in the way he walked, like someone who believed the world belonged entirely to him. Still, she smiled kindly. When Toby passed near her, she raised a hand. My son, she said softly, her voice calm like still water. Would you help me move this tray a little? The sun is too strong here. It was a simple request. Small, harmless. But pride has a way of turning small things into insults. Toby stopped. Slowly. His friends watched, curious. He turned toward her with disbelief written across his face. "Excuse me," he said. The woman gestured gently to the tray. "Just a little help, my son." Toby laughed sharply. "Do I look like your servant?" His friend snickered. The old woman quickly shook her head. No, I only asked because you are strong." Before she could finish the sentence, Toby slapped her. The sound cracked through the air like a sudden thunderclap. Students nearby froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few girls gasped. Phones appeared almost instantly, recording the scene. The old woman staggered slightly, one hand rising slowly to her cheek. But she did not fall. She did not shout. She did not curse him. Instead, she looked at him quietly, studying him, as if trying to understand something deeper than the slap itself. Toby rolled his eyes. "Next time, learn your place." His friends laughed nervously, unsure whether to admire him or feel uncomfortable. Around them, whispers spread through the crowd. Did he really slap her? That's someone's grandmother. Someone record that, but the old woman said nothing. She simply adjusted the tray carefully and picked it up with both hands. Her movements were slow, steady, dignified. As she turned to leave, she paused beside Toby. The crowd leaned closer, expecting anger, expecting tears, expecting a curse. Instead, she spoke in a voice so quiet that only Toby heard clearly. "You have done enough." Toby smirked. "Good. Then move along." But the old woman did not walk away immediately. She studied his face once more. Then she leaned slightly closer and whispered something that sounded strange, almost meaningless. "May your eyes open." For a moment, Toby frowned. What does that even mean? But the old woman had already turned away. She walked slowly into the crowd until the movement of students swallowed her completely. Gone. Toby shrugged. Crazy old woman. His friends laughed again, though some of them glanced uneasily at the phones still recording. One student muttered quietly to another, "This will spread everywhere." But Toby didn't care. To him, it was nothing. Just another moment where someone beneath him had dared to ask for something, and he had reminded them of their place. He tossed his bag into the back seat of his father's car when the driver pulled up. As the vehicle pulled away from the school gate, the crowd slowly returned to their conversations, yet something lingered in the air, something uneasy, something heavy. Far down the street, the old woman paused beneath a large mango tree. She gently placed the tray on the ground. Her hand rested briefly against her cheek where the slap had landed, but there was no anger in her eyes, only patience. She looked toward the road where Toby's car had disappeared. Then she whispered quietly to herself, "Sometimes the loudest pride needs the deepest silence to hear the truth." Above her, the wind rustled softly through the mango leaves, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly across the sky. Toby would sleep comfortably that night, but before morning came, his world would change. That evening, Toby returned home the same way he did every day, without thinking about the people or moments he had passed along the way. The black SUV glided through the tall iron gates of the Adebayo mansion, and the security guard saluted the car as it entered the compound. The house stood like a palace behind a stretch of manicured lawn and trimmed hedges. The marble walls reflected the orange glow of the setting sun, and the fountain in the middle of the driveway sprayed water into the air with quiet elegance. To anyone outside the gates, it looked like perfection. To Toby, it was simply normal. The driver parked under the shade of the portico. "We're home, sir," the driver said politely. Toby grabbed his backpack from the seat and stepped out, barely acknowledging the man. He walked into the house with the lazy confidence of someone who had never once wondered whether the doors of life might close on him. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender polish and fresh cooking. A maid passed by carrying a tray of fruit. "Good evening, Master Toby," she said softly. Toby nodded without really looking at her. His mother's voice floated from the living room where she was speaking on the phone. "Yes, of course the foundation will sponsor the event," she said. "We always support education." Toby rolled his eyes slightly. His mother loved charity events. There were always speeches about kindness, compassion, and giving back to society. Toby often wondered why she cared so much about strangers. He tossed his school bag onto the leather couch and collapsed into one of the chairs. Then his phone buzzed. Messages flooded the group chat he shared with his friends. Kunle. Bro, you're trending. Femi. Someone posted the video. Another message appeared. Jeed. You slapped that woman like a movie scene. Toby opened the link. The video began playing. The camera was shaky, clearly recorded by a student standing nearby. The footage showed the old woman reaching out politely. Her voice was barely audible. Then, the slap. The comments were already pouring in beneath the video. What kind of child is this? No respect for elders anymore. His parents should be ashamed. Someone find his school. Toby leaned back in his chair and scoffed. People online always talk too much. He typed in the group chat. Relax, it's nothing. Kunle replied instantly. Still funny, though. Another message appeared. Your parents might see it. That made Toby pause for a moment. But only for a moment. My parents deal with bigger problems than internet drama, he muttered. He locked the phone and tossed it onto the table. Soon the house staff called him for dinner. The dining table was long enough to seat 12 people, even though only 3 usually sat there. His father arrived late as usual, loosening his tie while scrolling through messages on his tablet. Busy day? He sighed as he sat down. His mother smiled politely. Construction meeting again? Yes. Investors. They spoke about business deals, charity events, and upcoming travel plans. Toby barely listened. His mind was on video games and weekend plans. No one mentioned the video. By the time dinner ended, the sky outside had turned dark and quiet. Toby climbed the staircase to his room. His bedroom was larger than some small apartments. One wall was covered with a massive television screen, another with shelves of expensive sneakers neatly arranged in rows. He dropped onto the bed and picked up his phone again. More notifications, more comments, some angry, some mocking. But Toby felt nothing. People criticized online every day. Tomorrow the internet would move on to another scandal. He plugged the phone into the charger and switched off the lights. Within minutes, sleep took him. For several hours, the house remained peaceful. Outside, the night air moved gently through the trees. Inside, the mansion slept. But shortly after midnight, Toby woke suddenly. At first, he did not know why. His room was silent, yet something felt wrong. He sat up slowly. The digital clock on his bedside table glowed 12:17 a.m. The air felt colder than usual. He rubbed his eyes and reached for his phone. The screen lit up. But something strange caught his attention immediately. The contact list. Every name was gone. Where there should have been hundreds of saved contacts, friends, classmates, family, there were only numbers. Blank numbers with no names. What? Toby scrolled quickly. Nothing. Every contact erased. He frowned. Must be some software glitch. He tapped Kunle's number and pressed call. The phone rang twice. Then someone answered. Hello? Kunle, it's me. Silence. Who is this? The voice asked. It's Toby. Another pause. I think you have the wrong number. The call ended. Toby blinked. That's weird. He tried again. This time he called Femi. Ring, ring. Click. Hello? Femi, it's me. The voice sounded irritated. Who? Toby. I don't know any Toby. Stop calling this number. The line disconnected. Toby sat up straighter. A faint chill ran down his spine. Okay. That's strange. He quickly dialed Jide. Same result. Wrong number. He opened the group chat. The conversation history was gone. The chat itself no longer existed. His hands began to feel slightly cold. This must be some kind of phone crash. He climbed out of bed and walked toward the door. The hallway lights were dim. The mansion was quiet. He hurried down the staircase. Mom? He called. No answer. He walked into the living room. His mother sat on the couch reading something on her tablet. Relief washed over him. Mom, something's wrong with my phone. She looked up slowly. Her expression was calm but confused. Yes? Toby frowned. It's me. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. I'm sorry. Do I know you? For a moment, Toby thought she was joking. He laughed awkwardly. Very funny. But her face remained serious. Can I help you? She asked politely. The laughter died instantly in his throat. Mom, stop joking. She stood up slowly now, concern replacing confusion. I think you've entered the wrong house, she said carefully. The words hit him like a punch. What? This is private property. I suggest you leave before security arrives. His heart began to race. Mom, it's me. Toby. Her face showed no recognition. None. Not a trace. Fear began spreading through his chest like cold water. He backed away slowly. No, this isn't possible. He ran outside. The night air hit him hard. The security guard at the gate turned toward him immediately. Hey, who are you? Toby rushed toward him. It's me. The guard stepped forward firmly. Stop right there. I live here. The guard's face hardened. I've worked here for 6 years. I know everyone who lives in this house. Toby's voice trembled. I'm their son. The guard pulled out his phone. If you don't leave now, I'm calling the police. The world tilted around him. Cars passed on the road outside. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance. Everything looked normal, except his entire life had vanished. His family did not know him. His friends did not know him. His phone held no memory of him. He stepped slowly backward away from the gate. Then he turned and walked into the dark street. For the first time in his life, Toby Adebayo had nowhere to go. For the first time in his life, Toby Adebayo walked the streets without belonging anywhere. The city that had once felt familiar now seemed strangely distant, like a place he had only seen in pictures. Cars rushed past him without slowing. Streetlights flickered on one by one as the night deepened, casting long shadows across the pavement. He stood at the corner of the road for several minutes, staring at the traffic moving endlessly before him. Just hours earlier, he had been a boy with everything: money, comfort, a powerful name. Now he was simply a stranger standing in the dark. His chest tightened. This can't be real, he whispered. Maybe he was dreaming. Maybe the world would reset in the morning. But deep inside, something told him this was no dream. The air smelled different tonight, thicker, heavier. The sounds of the city felt louder: distant horns, barking bulls, the rumble of buses passing on the main road. And beneath it all was a quiet realization creeping slowly into his mind. He was alone. He began walking. At first, he walked without direction, his mind racing. He passed closed shops, darkened windows, and street vendors packing up the last of their goods for the night. A group of boys laughed loudly outside a small kiosk. For a moment, Toby thought about approaching them, maybe asking for help. But something stopped him. The thought of explaining his situation felt ridiculous. Hello, my entire life disappeared. Even he wouldn't believe that story. So he kept walking. Eventually, exhaustion began to creep into his legs. His expensive school shoes, once a symbol of status, now felt painfully stiff against his feet. He had never walked this much before. Not really. Growing up, there had always been a driver, or a ride, or someone else to carry him somewhere. Now, every step reminded him of something he had never considered before. How tiring survival could be. He stopped beside a small roadside stall where a woman was closing up for the night. "Please," he said awkwardly. "Do you know where I can find a taxi?" The woman looked at him briefly, then pointed down the road. "Bus stop is 2 streets away." Then she continued packing without another word. Toby stood there a moment. No recognition. No special treatment. Just another stranger asking a question. He continued walking. Eventually, he reached the bus stop. But there were no buses now, only a few people sitting quietly on the wooden benches. An old man sleeping with his head resting against a bag. A woman holding a tired child in her arms. A young boy sitting beside a basket of oranges. The boy looked about 8 or 9 years old. His clothes were worn and slightly dusty, but his eyes were bright. Toby sat down on the bench nearby, trying to think. His stomach growled loudly. He had eaten dinner earlier, but the shock and fear had burned through the comfort of that meal quickly. The boy beside the basket shifted slightly, adjusting the oranges inside. One orange rolled loose and fell to the ground. The boy jumped up quickly to catch it, but accidentally bumped into Toby. The basket tipped. Oranges spilled across the pavement. The boy froze, his face filled with panic. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean—" Toby stood up instinctively, irritation rising in his chest. "Watch where you're going!" The boy's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, please. These are my mother's." He hurried to gather the oranges, his small hands moving quickly as if afraid something terrible might happen if he didn't act fast enough. Toby watched him. For a brief moment, the old instinct returned. The instinct to walk away. To leave someone else to deal with the problem. But then something flashed across his mind. A memory. The old woman outside the school gate. "My son, would you help me move this tray?" The sharp sound of the slap echoed faintly in his thoughts. Toby hesitated. His chest tightened slightly. The boy struggled to gather the rolling oranges. One rolled beneath the bench. Another rolled toward the road. Without thinking too much, Toby bent down. He picked up one of the oranges, then another. The boy looked up in surprise. You're helping?" Toby didn't answer. He simply gathered the rest of the oranges and placed them back into the basket. The boy stared at him for a moment, clearly confused. Then his face brightened with a grateful smile. "Thank you." The words felt strange. Not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were unexpected. Toby nodded awkwardly. "No problem." The boy lifted the basket again. "My mother will be happy," he said. Then he sat down quietly beside the bench again. Toby remained standing for a moment. Something about the small interaction felt different. Back at school, people praised him constantly. But those compliments were always about money, confidence, or popularity. This thank you was simpler, yet somehow heavier, more real. He sat down again. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. Then the boy offered him one orange. "You can have one," he said kindly. Toby hesitated. "No, it's okay," the boy insisted. "You helped me." Reluctantly, Toby accepted the fruit. The orange was slightly warm from the night air. He peeled it slowly. The sweet smell drifted upward. It was the simplest food he had eaten in a long time, but as he took the first bite, he realized something strange. It tasted better than most meals he had eaten recently, maybe because he had actually done something to deserve it. The bus stop slowly emptied as the night continued. Eventually, the boy's mother arrived to collect him. They walked away together, the basket balanced carefully on her head. Before leaving, the boy turned back and waved. "Thank you again." Toby raised his hand slightly in return. Then they disappeared into the night. He remained alone at the bus stop, but something inside him had shifted slightly. A small crack had appeared in the thick wall of pride he had carried for years. Hours passed. As morning approached, the sky began to turn pale gray. The city slowly woke up again. Vendors set up their stalls. Buses returned to the road. Workers hurried toward early jobs. Toby stood and stretched his stiff legs. His body ached, but he felt strangely calmer. As he walked through the waking streets, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. A woman struggling to push a heavy wheelbarrow filled with sacks. Without thinking too much, he stepped forward. "Let me help." She looked surprised, but nodded gratefully. Together they pushed the wheelbarrow up a small slope. "Thank you, my son," she said. He nodded and continued walking. A few streets later, he saw a man carrying a stack of wooden planks that looked dangerously unbalanced. Again, Toby stepped forward. "Here, I can hold some of those." The man smiled. "Bless you." The words followed him as he walked away. "Bless you. Thank you." Small phrases, but they left an unusual warmth in his chest. By mid-morning, Toby had helped several strangers. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic, just small acts of assistance. Yet each one chipped away a little more at the boy he had been yesterday. For the first time in his life, people were not reacting to his name. They were reacting to his actions. He stopped beside a small roadside stand and leaned against the wall. The city buzzed around him. But inside his mind, one question repeated itself again and again. Where is the old woman? The one who had whispered those strange words. "May your eyes open." He looked around the busy street. Vendors shouted prices. Customers bargained loudly. Children ran past laughing. But the old woman was nowhere to be seen. Still, deep inside, Toby felt certain of one thing. If he wanted his life back, if he wanted answers, he would have to find her. By the time the sun climbed high into the afternoon sky, the city had fully awakened. Markets buzzed with noise. Buses roared through the streets, and traders shouted prices that bounced from one stall to another like echoes. But for Toby, the city had become something else entirely. It had become a maze. Every street looked unfamiliar now. Every crowd swallowed faces too quickly. The old woman who had once seemed so ordinary had vanished into the vast rhythm of the city, leaving behind only a whisper and a mystery. "May your eyes open." The words repeated themselves in Toby's mind like a quiet drumbeat. He walked slowly along a crowded market road, scanning faces as people passed him. Women balanced baskets of tomatoes and peppers on their heads. Men pushed carts stacked with sacks of rice. Children ran between stalls laughing, their feet kicking up little clouds of red dust. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone except him. Toby stopped beside a stall where an elderly man sold bottled water and biscuits. "Excuse me," Toby said carefully. "Have you seen an old woman who sells groundnuts near the school gate?" The man scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Which school?" "Bright Future Academy." The man shrugged. "Many people sell groundnuts." Toby sighed. "Thank you anyway." He continued walking. The sun burned overhead, pressing heat against the crowded market streets. Sweat rolled slowly down Toby's back as he passed stall after stall. He had never walked through the city like this before. Not truly. Growing up, his world had been limited to certain places: air-conditioned malls, private estates, restaurants where waiters treated him like royalty. But this side of the city was different. It was louder, messier, more alive, and strangely more honest. As he walked, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. A woman counting coins carefully before buying vegetables. A father lifting his tired daughter onto his shoulders. A young mechanic laughing with friends while wiping grease from his hands. Life here was not polished, but it was real. Toby asked several more people about the old woman. A fruit seller shook her head. A taxi driver shrugged. A group of students said they had seen many vendors near the school gate, but didn't know their names. Each answer pushed him a little further into frustration. By late afternoon, his legs felt heavy again. He sat down on a low wall beside a small roadside cafe where the smell of fried plantain drifted through the air. His stomach growled loudly. He had eaten very little since leaving home. The cafe owner noticed him watching the food and frowned slightly. "You buying or just looking?" the man asked bluntly. Toby hesitated. "I don't have money." The man waved his hand impatiently. "Then move away. Customers need space." Toby stood up quietly. A week ago, he would have been furious. Today, he simply nodded and stepped aside. As he walked away, he realized something uncomfortable. For most of his life, people had treated him with kindness because of who he was. Now that no one knew his name, he was learning how the world treated someone who had nothing. And it wasn't always gentle. Still, he kept searching. Street after street, market after market. But the old woman remained invisible. As evening approached, the sunlight softened into a golden glow. Long shadows stretched across the streets, and the heat began to fade slightly. Toby found himself walking toward a quieter part of the city. Here, the noise of the markets faded into softer sounds, voices speaking calmly, the clinking of cooking pots, the distant laughter of children. Small houses lined the narrow road. Laundry hung between wooden poles. A group of women sat outside one house peeling cassava together. Toby slowed his pace. Something about this area felt peaceful. Not rich, not modern, but warm. He turned a corner and noticed a small building with a faded sign hanging above the entrance. Community shelter. The door stood open. Inside, people moved quietly between rows of simple tables. Some were serving food. Others sat together sharing small meals. Children played near the entrance, while an older man read from a book to a small group of listeners. The place felt humble, but alive with kindness. Toby stood outside the gate for a moment, watching. Then something caught his eye. Near the side of the building, beneath a large mango tree, sat a familiar wooden tray. His heart skipped. The tray looked old, worn from years of use. And beside it, someone sat quietly. An old woman, her wrapper faded, her posture slightly bent, her hands resting calmly on her lap. The same calm presence, the same watchful eyes. Toby's chest tightened. "It's her." He walked slowly toward the tree. Each step felt strangely heavy, as if his body understood that this moment mattered more than anything that had happened since the slap. The old woman looked up as he approached. There was no surprise in her eyes, only quiet recognition. "Yes," she said softly. Toby stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening breeze rustled the mango leaves above them. Children's laughter drifted faintly from the shelter. Finally, Toby found his voice. "You." The woman nodded gently. "Yes." His heart pounded. "What did you do to me?" The question burst out of him louder than he intended. Why does nobody know me anymore? The old woman studied him calmly. Her gaze was steady, thoughtful, but not angry. I did nothing, she said quietly. Toby shook his head in frustration. That's impossible. My family doesn't know me. My friends don't know me. My entire life disappeared. His voice trembled. What did you do? The old woman raised a hand slightly. Sit. Reluctantly, Toby lowered himself onto a wooden bench beneath the mango tree. The woman pointed gently toward the shelter building. Do you see those people? Toby glanced toward the open doors. Inside, volunteers served plates of food to men and women sitting patiently at the tables. Yes. Many of them once had homes, she said softly. Some had families. Some had businesses. Some had everything. Toby frowned. What does that have to do with me? The old woman looked directly into his eyes. Everything. She leaned slightly forward. When you slapped me outside the school gate, you did not see a human being. You saw someone you believed was beneath you. Toby swallowed. The memory of the slap returned sharply. I was angry, he muttered weakly. The woman shook her head gently. No, you were blind. Her words struck deeper than he expected. Toby looked down at his hands. Silence stretched between them for several seconds. Then the old woman spoke again. You asked what happened to your life. Toby nodded slowly. Yes. She pointed gently toward his chest. Your life did not disappear. It simply stepped aside, so you could finally see it. Toby looked back up at her. Confusion still clouded his mind. What does that mean? The woman's voice remained calm. Before this moment, you moved through the world without noticing anyone who could not benefit you. Servants, vendors, strangers. You treated them like shadows. Toby felt a slow wave of shame rise inside him. The old woman continued. But shadows are still human beings. And pride is a blindness worse than darkness. Toby whispered quietly. Then why did you let this happen to me? The woman smiled softly. I did not. She gestured gently toward the shelter again. Life did. He followed her gaze. People were sharing food, laughing, helping one another. No cameras. No status. No power. Just people surviving together. The old woman turned back to him. You want your old life back? Toby nodded immediately. Yes. Her eyes softened. Then first, you must understand the lives you ignored. She pointed toward the shelter. Help them. Work with them. Listen to them. Toby hesitated. For how long? The old woman smiled faintly. Until your eyes truly open. The sun dipped lower behind the buildings, and for the first time since his world had disappeared, Toby realized the search he had begun that morning had only just begun. The mango tree cast long shadows across the ground as the sun slowly lowered toward the horizon. Evening had begun to settle over the small community shelter, and a soft golden light filtered through the leaves above Toby and the old woman. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Toby sat quietly on the wooden bench, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together tightly as if he were trying to hold his thoughts in place. Everything inside his mind felt tangled. Only a few days ago, though it felt like weeks, he had been a different person. A boy who walked through life without stopping, without looking, without wondering about the people around him. Now he sat beneath a mango tree, listening to the quiet hum of a shelter where strangers shared food and kindness. And for the first time, he realized how little he had understood about the world. The old woman watched him calmly. Her eyes were not judgmental, but they were observant. You are thinking, she said softly. Toby nodded slowly. Yes. What are you thinking about? He hesitated. Then he answered honestly. I don't understand why all this had to happen just because I slapped you. The woman smiled gently. That is because you are still looking at the slap. She leaned slightly forward. But the slap was not the real problem. Toby frowned. Then what was? The blindness behind it. The words hung quietly in the air. Toby lowered his eyes. I didn't think about it like that. No, she said kindly. You did not think about it at all. From inside the shelter came the sound of plates being stacked and chairs scraping lightly against the floor. The volunteers were finishing dinner service, and people began stepping outside into the cooler evening air. A small group of children ran past the tree, chasing one another with joyful shouts. Toby watched them for a moment. They look happy, he said. Yes, the woman replied. Even though many of them have very little. Toby shook his head slightly. That doesn't make sense. The woman chuckled softly. Sometimes happiness grows in places where pride cannot survive. Toby leaned back against the bench, staring at the shelter building. Why do you sit outside the school gate every day? He asked. The woman folded her hands in her lap. To watch? To watch what? Young people, she said, and how they treat the world around them. Toby turned toward her again. That sounds strange. Does it? She pointed toward the street beyond the shelter. Every day I see hundreds of students walk past me. Some greet me kindly. Some buy groundnuts and smile. Some pretend I do not exist. And some... She paused slightly. See me as something beneath them. Toby felt a familiar sting of shame inside his chest. And you just sit there watching? Yes. Why? The old woman looked up at the mango tree branches swaying gently above them. Because how a person treats someone who cannot benefit them tells you everything about their character. Toby remembered something she had said earlier. You said I treated people like shadows. Yes. But I didn't mean to. The woman nodded. I know. That is why I gave you time. Toby's brow furrowed. Time for what? To see the shadows. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he thought back to the past few days, helping the boy gather oranges, pushing the wheelbarrow, carrying planks for the carpenter. Each small moment had felt different from anything he had experienced before. When he had been rich and respected, people praised him for his confidence. But these strangers thanked him for something much simpler: kindness. And those words had stayed with him longer than applause ever had. The old woman studied his expression carefully. Tell me, she said, what have you learned since you lost your name? Toby looked down at his hands. He thought carefully before answering. I learned that the city is harder than I thought. The woman nodded. That is true. I learned that people struggle every day just to eat. Yes. And I learned that when you help someone even in a small way, they remember. The old woman smiled. That is the beginning of sight. Toby looked up. But I still don't understand something. What is it? Why did everyone forget me? The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the shelter where volunteers were now distributing blankets to a few elderly guests. Finally, she spoke. Your world was built on recognition. Toby tilted his head slightly. What do you mean? You were important because people knew your name. Yes. But when the name disappeared, who were you? Toby opened his mouth to answer. Then he stopped. For the first time, he realized something uncomfortable. Without his family's wealth, without his school reputation, without his father's influence, he had not known who he was. The old woman watched understanding slowly dawn across his face. "That is why you needed to become invisible," she said softly, "so you could meet yourself without the noise of your pride." Toby let out a long breath. "That's painful." "Yes," she said, "but growth often is." The evening breeze picked up slightly, rustling the mango leaves above them. From the shelter doorway, a volunteer waved to the old woman. "Food is ready for the late arrivals." The woman nodded back politely. Then she turned to Toby again. "Do you want your life to return?" He answered without hesitation. "Yes." "Are you sure?" "Of course." She leaned forward slightly. "Even if returning means carrying what you have learned for the rest of your life?" Toby hesitated. That question felt heavier than the others. It meant he could not simply go back to being the person he had been before. It meant change. Real change. But when he thought about the boy with the oranges, the woman with the wheelbarrow, the people sharing food inside the shelter, he realized something important. He didn't want to be the same boy anymore. He looked back at the old woman. Yes. She studied his face carefully, searching for something. Finally, she nodded. "You are close." "Close to what?" "Understanding." Toby leaned forward slightly. "What happens next?" The old woman pointed toward the shelter once more. "Help them." "For how long?" She smiled gently. "Until helping others no longer feels like a lesson, but like part of who you are." Toby stood slowly from the bench. He looked toward the shelter entrance where people continued arriving quietly. Then he turned back to the old woman. "Will you still be here?" She nodded. "I will be watching." He took a few steps toward the building. Then he paused and looked back. "Why did you choose me?" The old woman's eyes sparkled slightly. "I did not choose you. Your pride did." Toby considered that answer for a moment. Then he nodded slowly, and for the first time since the slap outside the school gate, he walked toward the shelter not as someone seeking answers, but as someone ready to earn them. Weeks passed beneath the shade of the mango tree. At first, the days felt long and unfamiliar to Toby. He woke each morning on a small mattress in one of the shelter's quiet rooms, the sounds of the neighborhood already alive outside, pots clanging, roosters crowing, vendors shouting greetings to one another as the sun slowly climbed into the sky. Life at the shelter moved according to a simple rhythm. People arrived hungry, volunteers cooked, meals were served, conversations unfolded, and slowly lives were stitched together again. One small act of kindness at a time. Toby became part of that rhythm. At the beginning, the work felt strange to him. He had never washed large pots before. He had never swept dusty floors or carried sacks of rice from delivery trucks into a storeroom. The first time he tried to serve food to a long line of people, he spilled half a tray of stew on the ground. The volunteers laughed kindly. "It happens," one woman told him. Another handed him a cloth. "Just clean it and try again." No one mocked him. No one treated him like a failure. They simply expected him to learn. And slowly he did. Every morning he swept the courtyard before the first guests arrived. The ground beneath the mango tree was always covered with fallen leaves, and he found a strange peace in clearing them away. Each afternoon he helped prepare meals, cutting vegetables, stirring large pots, arranging plates. In the evenings, he sat with the guests and listened to their stories. Some had lost jobs. Some had lost homes. Some had lost families. Yet many of them still laughed easily, still shared what little they had, still greeted one another like old friends. Toby began to understand something he had never noticed before. Hardship did not always make people bitter. Sometimes it made them gentler. One afternoon, the boy with the basket of oranges appeared again. This time he walked into the shelter confidently, waving at Toby. "Hey," Toby smiled. "You came back." The boy nodded proudly. "My mother volunteers here now." Sure enough. A few minutes later, the boy's mother appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray of food. She smiled warmly when she saw Toby. "You're the young man who helped my son." Toby rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "It was nothing." The woman shook her head. "No kindness is nothing." Those words stayed with him long after the meal ended. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the old version of Toby faded away. He no longer woke thinking about status or reputation. He woke thinking about what needed to be done that day. He stopped expecting praise. He started noticing needs. Sometimes he fixed broken chairs. Sometimes he helped children with schoolwork. Sometimes he simply sat beside someone who needed to talk. And strangely, the more he gave, the lighter his heart felt. One evening, after helping serve dinner, Toby walked outside to the mango tree. The sky above was painted with deep shades of orange and purple as the sun sank below the rooftops. The old woman sat on her usual bench, watching the evening quietly. Toby approached slowly. She looked up and smiled. "You have changed." He sat beside her. "I think so." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant sounds of the city settling into night. Finally, Toby spoke. "I used to think being powerful meant people listening to you." The old woman tilted her head slightly. "And now? Now I think it means being someone people can trust." She nodded approvingly. "That is wisdom." Toby looked down at his hands. They were rougher now. Small cuts and scars marked his fingers from weeks of work. But he didn't mind. "These hands used to do nothing," he said quietly. The woman smiled gently. "And now?" "Now they help." A breeze rustled the mango leaves overhead. For a moment, the world felt perfectly still. Toby took a deep breath. "There's something I need to say." The woman waited patiently. He turned toward her fully and knelt on the ground. His voice trembled slightly. "I am sorry. Not because I lost my life. Not because everything disappeared. But because I finally understand what I did." His eyes filled with emotion. "You were kind to me when you asked for help, and I answered with cruelty." The old woman studied his face carefully, not searching for perfect words, but for sincerity. After a moment, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Now your apology has weight." Toby lowered his head. "I wish I could undo it." She shook her head softly. "The past cannot be undone, but the future can be built." He looked up slowly. "Have my eyes opened?" The old woman smiled. "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly, as though listening to something deeper than the wind. Then she whispered softly, "Your lesson is complete." For a moment, nothing happened. The evening remained quiet. But suddenly, Toby felt something shift inside him. A strange warmth spread through his chest. The sounds of the city grew sharper, closer, more familiar. His pocket vibrated. He blinked in surprise and reached inside. His phone. It lit up with a notification, a message from his mother. He stared at the screen in disbelief. The contact name appeared clearly. "Mom." Another message followed. "Where are you?" "We've been worried." Toby looked up quickly. The old woman was still sitting beside him, but something about her seemed different, almost lighter. He stood slowly. "What just happened?" She gestured toward the shelter. Your world has returned. Toby looked around. Everything suddenly felt familiar again. His name, his life, his family, all restored. But something inside him had changed permanently. He turned back toward the old woman. I won't forget this. She nodded. I know. Toby looked toward the shelter where volunteers were finishing their evening tasks. Then he turned back to her again. I'm not leaving. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. You have your life back. Yes. But this place is part of it now. A proud smile spread across her face. That is how I know your eyes truly opened. The evening breeze swept gently through the mango tree. And for the first time in his life, Toby understood a truth that would guide him forever. Character is not revealed by how we treat the powerful. It is revealed by how we treat those who cannot offer us anything at all. And from that day forward, Toby Adebayo made sure his eyes never closed again.